It was October 23, 1971 at the Boston Garden in Massachusetts, and Elvis Presley was in the middle of one of the most successful touring years of his entire career, performing to sold-out crowds night after night across the country. And on this particular evening, 14,000 people had packed that arena from floor to ceiling with the kind of energy that builds when an entire city wants to be in the same room at the same time. People had driven in from Vermont and Maine and New Hampshire and Connecticut to be there, some having camped out overnight for the chance to buy tickets, others having paid scalpers 2 or 3 times the face value without hesitation, because this was Elvis in the full force of his prime touring years, and every show was something people talked about for years afterward. The atmosphere inside the Boston Garden that night was pure celebration, with teenage girls in the front rows overwhelmed just by being close to someone they had idolized for years, and middle-aged couples who had fallen in love to Elvis's music back in the 1950s holding hands and swaying, and older fans who had initially written off rock and roll but had been completely won over somewhere along the way. Elvis had already worked through several high-energy numbers, had the crowd on their feet and singing along, and was now moving into the slower and more emotional section of his set, the part where his voice and the music connected with people at a different level, where the screaming gave way to a kind of reverent attention. He was in the opening lines of Bridge Over Troubled Water, one of the most powerful songs in his repertoire, and as he sang he was doing what he always did, letting his eyes move across the faces in the crowd, making contact with individual people, making each of them feel seen. That was when he noticed her. In section 108, about 12 rows back from the stage, a young woman in a red dress was standing among the seated crowd, but not the way people stand when they are caught up in the joy of a concert. She was standing because she could not sit down, because her whole body was shaking with the force of her crying. Her hands were covering her face and her shoulders were heaving visibly, and the people seated near her were looking at her with concern, and a few were gently trying to reach out to her, but she was somewhere far inside herself and could barely register anything around her. What nobody in that arena knew, including Elvis, was the story of what Jennifer Martinez's day had looked like before she walked through those doors. That morning she had sat in the office of her doctor, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, at Boston General Hospital, waiting for the results of her final scans after 18 months of fighting stage 3 breast cancer. 18 months of chemotherapy that had made her violently ill. 18 months of losing her hair and her energy and her sense of who she was. 18 months of lying in hospital rooms and wondering in the darkest hours of the night whether she would be alive to see her 25th birthday. When Dr. Mitchell walked in that morning she was smiling, and Jennifer said she knew before the doctor even opened her mouth. The scans were clear. The cancer was gone. She was in remission. Jennifer sat in that office in complete stunned silence, because she had been steeling herself for so long against the possibility of hope that now that the news was actually good she did not quite know how to let herself believe it. Her best friend Maria had been with her at the appointment and had said immediately that they needed to celebrate, that they needed to do something significant to mark the moment. Jennifer said she was not sure she had the energy for anything because her last treatment had been only 3 days earlier and she was still exhausted and recovering. But Maria had reached into her purse and pulled out a folded newspaper open to the entertainment section, and there was an advertisement for Elvis Presley performing that night at the Boston Garden. And Maria told her she had bought the tickets 2 months earlier because she had simply known, that Jennifer was going to get through this. Jennifer looked at Elvis's face smiling from the page of that newspaper and something shifted inside her. She had been a fan since she was a teenager. She had his posters on her bedroom wall and his records and his films. During the worst nights of her treatment, when the pain was at its worst and the fear felt like it was pressing in from every direction, she had put on his music and let it carry her through until morning. She told Maria she would go. She went home and put on the red dress she had not been able to wear for more than a year because of the weight she had lost during treatment. She did her makeup carefully, covering the paleness that still lingered in her face from months of chemotherapy. She put on the wig that matched her natural hair color, the hair she had lost and that was only just beginning to grow back. When she stood in front of the mirror she saw someone who looked almost like herself again, almost like the person she had been before cancer, almost fully alive. She and Maria went to the concert. And then the music started and everyone around her was happy and singing and the lights were bright and Elvis was up on that stage, and it all came down on Jennifer at once, the full weight of everything she had been through, everything she had come so terrifyingly close to losing, the fear and the pain and the uncertainty that had been her constant companions for 18 months, and the overwhelming and almost incomprehensible reality that she was actually going to live, that she was going to have a future, that she had won. And the only way her body knew how to respond to all of that arriving at once was to shake and cry until she could barely stand. Elvis stopped singing mid-verse. His band, puzzled by the sudden silence, gradually came to a stop, one instrument at a time. The arena began to quiet as 14,000 people realized something unusual was happening. Elvis walked to the edge of the stage and shielded his eyes from the spotlights to see into the crowd more clearly. He spoke into the microphone in a gentle voice and addressed the woman in the red dress in section 108, asking if she was all right. Jennifer looked up and suddenly became aware that Elvis Presley was speaking directly to her with 14,000 people watching. Her face was streaked with tears and her makeup was completely gone at this point, and she shook her head to answer him but could not find any words. Elvis asked her name. Someone near her got a microphone close enough for her to be heard, and through her sobs she managed to say Jennifer Martinez. Elvis said her name softly back to her and told her he needed her to do something for him. He asked her to come up on stage so they could talk. He told her she could do that. Jennifer looked genuinely frightened by the idea, but the people around her were already helping her toward the aisle, and security appeared to guide her to the stage. As she made her way through the crowd, every one of those 14,000 people sat in complete silence watching, with no idea what was happening but understanding instinctively that something real was unfolding in front of them. When Jennifer reached the stage, Elvis extended his hand and helped her up the steps, because she was shaking badly enough that she could barely manage them on her own. He put his arm around her shoulders and guided her to the center of the stage. Standing close to her, he could see she was in her mid-20s and that she had clearly put real time and care into how she looked that evening, that this was not someone who had come to the concert in distress. This was someone who had come to celebrate something, and something had broken open inside her once she got there. Elvis said her name quietly and told her she had come there looking beautiful and that something was hurting her deeply, and he asked if she wanted to tell him what was wrong. Jennifer tried to speak, but the sobs came again and took over before she could get any words out. Elvis waited without rushing her, kept his arm around her, and signaled to someone backstage to bring a chair. A stagehand came out with one and Elvis guided Jennifer into it and told her to take all the time she needed, that they were not going anywhere and that everyone in the building would wait. And they did. 14,000 people sat in quiet and patient silence while a young woman on a stage tried to find her voice. After a minute that stretched out and felt much longer, Jennifer managed to speak. She apologized for interrupting the show and Elvis told her she had not interrupted anything, that whatever was hurting her mattered more than any song he could sing, and he asked her again what was going on. Jennifer took an unsteady breath and said that today had been her last day of chemotherapy, that she had been fighting breast cancer at stage 3 for 18 months. The arena went so quiet you could hear the breathing of the people nearest the stage. Jennifer continued, her voice gaining a little steadiness even as the tears kept coming. She said the doctors had told her that morning that she was in remission, that the cancer was gone, that she had beaten it. A wave of emotion moved through the crowd and some people started to applaud, but Elvis gently raised his hand to hold them back because he could see Jennifer had more to say. She said she had wanted to celebrate, had wanted to do something meaningful to mark the end of 18 months of fear and pain, and so she had gotten dressed up and come to the concert because she wanted to feel alive again. But then she said that when she got there and the music started and everyone around her was happy and Elvis was up on that stage singing, everything she had been through hit her all at once, the fear and the pain and every moment she had doubted she would survive, and then the realization that she actually had survived, that she was going to have a life and a future, and that 6 months ago she had genuinely not been sure she would live long enough to ever see Elvis perform in person, and that here she was. She said she was not crying because she was sad. She was crying because she was happy. She was crying because she had survived. Elvis's eyes filled with tears. He knelt down beside her chair and took both her hands in his and told her in a voice thick with emotion that she had come there that night to celebrate life, and that was the most beautiful reason anyone had ever come to one of his shows. The arena erupted. All 14,000 people were on their feet at once, cheering and crying, and the ovation went on for nearly 2 full minutes before it began to settle. When the room quieted, Elvis stood and told the audience he wanted them to meet Jennifer Martinez, that she was a fighter and a survivor and that she had just beaten cancer. The applause started again, even louder, with people screaming and stomping their feet, and it felt completely unlike any other sound that had filled that building that evening because this was not the sound of people reacting to entertainment. This was the sound of people celebrating the fact that someone had lived. Elvis turned to his band and said he thought they needed to change the set list a little, that they were going to sing something special for Jennifer. He turned back to her and asked if she knew the song You'll Never Walk Alone. She nodded with fresh tears running down her face. Elvis told her that was what he wanted her to carry with her from that night, the reminder that she had never walked through her cancer alone, that she had had doctors and nurses and family and friends the whole way through, and that she was not going to walk alone going forward either. He told her they were all with her. Elvis began to sing "You'll Never Walk Alone," and then something happened that nobody in that arena had planned or anticipated. The entire crowd began to sing with him. 14,000 voices joining together to sing directly to Jennifer, for Jennifer, about hope and endurance and the truth that the worst storms eventually end. Jennifer sat in her chair with her hands over her face, openly sobbing, and she was smiling through every single tear. People in the front rows were not reaching toward the stage trying to touch Elvis the way fans usually do. They were reaching toward Jennifer, sending everything they had toward her. When the song ended, the standing ovation lasted more than 5 minutes. Elvis held Jennifer close, and when he stepped back he reached up and removed the silk scarf he was wearing around his neck, one of the signature scarves that fans would have paid a great deal of money to own, and he placed it gently around her shoulders. He told her he wanted her to have it, and that when hard moments came in the future, when doubt or fear crept back in the way it sometimes does after something like what she had been through, he wanted her to remember that night and remember that she was a survivor and that she was stronger than anything life was going to send her way. Then he turned to Joe Esposito, his road manager, who was standing in the wings, and told him to make sure they got Jennifer's contact information because he intended to stay in touch. He looked back at Jennifer and said he meant it, that he wanted to hear how she was doing, and that she had not just come there that night to see him, she had given him something too. She had reminded everyone in that building what truly mattered. Jennifer could barely get the words out, but she thanked him. Security helped her back to her seat, and the rest of the concert continued, but the atmosphere inside the Boston Garden had changed completely and permanently from what it had been before. It was no longer just a concert. It was something that everyone there would carry with them for the rest of their lives. The story did not end that evening. Several journalists who had been in the audience that night wrote about what they had witnessed, and within days the story was appearing in newspapers across the country, not only in entertainment coverage but in health sections and human interest stories and editorial pages, because it touched something that reached beyond the world of celebrity. The story made its way to Dr. Sarah Mitchell, Jennifer's doctor, who had been on call at the hospital that night and had not been able to attend the concert. When she heard what had happened, she was moved deeply, and she wrote an open letter to Elvis that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, which was not a publication known for covering celebrity stories, but whose editors felt the letter spoke to something genuinely important about the human dimension of medicine. In the letter, Dr. Mitchell wrote that as an oncologist she spent every day focused on the medical side of cancer, but that what Elvis had done that night had reminded her that treating cancer was not only about eliminating disease. It was about helping patients find their way back to joy, to life, to the ability to celebrate still being here. She said Elvis had looked at her daughter and seen not a cancer patient but a young woman who had survived something enormous and deserved to have that acknowledged. The story drew responses from cancer patients all across the country who wrote to Elvis to share their own experiences and thank him for the moment of recognition he had given Jennifer and by extension all of them. Elvis read the letters and personally responded to a great many of them. He kept his word to Jennifer. He called her periodically to check how she was doing. When she got married 2 years later, Elvis sent flowers and a handwritten note. When she had her first child in 1974, he sent a gift basket and wrote that her son or daughter had come into the world with one of the bravest people he had ever met for a mother. Jennifer remained cancer-free at the 5-year mark, and then the 10-year mark, and then 20 years out. She became a voice for early cancer detection and used her story, including the night at the Boston Garden, to reach other people who were fighting or had fought the same battle. She said in interviews that the night had fundamentally changed how she understood her own experience, that before it she had thought of her cancer as something she had endured largely alone, but that after standing on that stage and feeling 14,000 people singing toward her she understood that she was part of something larger, a whole community of people who had fought and survived and understood, and that Elvis had given her that. For Elvis, the night reinforced something he had always believed at his core, that truly seeing another person, stopping long enough to notice when someone is struggling and acknowledging what they have been through, mattered more than any perfectly executed performance ever could. Members of his band recalled that Boston's show for the rest of their careers as one of the most significant nights they had ever been part of, not because of the music, though the music had been excellent, but because of the moment when Elvis simply stopped being a performer and became one human being reaching across a stage toward another human being's pain and joy. The lesson of that October evening was not about fame or celebrity or entertainment. It was about paying attention. It was about understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is stop whatever they are doing and ask someone whether they are all right, and then actually wait for the answer.